April 30th, 1945. Deep beneath a ruined Berlin, Adolf Hitler, once the most feared man in Europe, is a trembling figure. His hands barely steady, his face yellowed and wasted, sustained by 28 daily medications as Soviet shells shake the bunker walls. The official story ends with his suicide, but in the final 24 hours of Adolf Hitler, history's most infamous dictator unravels minute by minute, raging at betrayals, haunted by Mussolini's death, desperately trying to control even the fate of his own corpse. What drove him from absolute power to abject collapse? And what really happened before his world ended forever? April 22nd, 1945. In the concrete maze beneath the Reich Chancellery, Hitler gathers his remaining military staff for a situation conference. The air vibrates with the distant thunder of Soviet artillery, each blast a reminder that Berlin is encircled and crumbling. Hitler's face is drawn, his eyes bloodshot. As his generals lay out the latest reports, the truth can no longer be hidden. His orders for a counterattack have been ignored, his armies are disintegrating, and the city is being swallowed by chaos. Suddenly, he erupts. Witnesses recall a torrent of rage, Hitler's voice rising to a shriek, accusing his commanders of treason, cowardice, and incompetence. He rails against those he claims have betrayed him, slamming his fist on the table, veins bulging, saliva spraying as he screams. Stenographers struggle to keep up as he denounces his closest officers by name, his words echoing through the bunker corridors. General Bergdorf and others stand frozen, watching a man once feared by millions, now reduced to a trembling, furious shell. For the first time, Hitler admits aloud that the war is lost. The words hang heavy in the bunker. Everything is ruined. The war is lost. I will remain in Berlin and fall here. There is no talk of escape, no fantasy of relief from the outside. The mask of invincibility is gone. Traudl Junge, his secretary, later describes the moment as a complete nervous breakdown, a psychological collapse witnessed by everyone in the room. The outburst lasts minutes but feels endless. When it ends, silence settles like dust. Even the constant pounding of Soviet guns seems muted in the aftermath. Outside, Berlin is being torn apart. Inside, routines begin to shift. The bunker staff sense the change immediately. Hitler's authority, once absolute, now feels brittle and desperate. His refusal to flee becomes a death sentence for himself and those who remain. Later, some will remember the way he stared past them, lost in his own defeat, his voice hoarse from screaming. The man who once commanded armies with a word now clings to the only power left, choosing the place and manner of his own end. From this moment, fatalism seeps into every corner of the bunker. The final act has begun, and everyone present knows it. Outside, the city burns. Below ground, the world of Adolf Hitler has collapsed in a single, shattering afternoon. In the dim corridors of the Führer bunker, the transformation in Hitler's appearance was unmistakable. A Hitler youth, fleeing the chaos above, caught a glimpse of the dictator and later described him as like a ghost. Pale, shrunken, eyes fixed on something distant, ignoring the bustle around him. The man who once dominated every room now seemed to drift through his own headquarters, lost in silence and shadow. The change was not just in spirit, but in flesh. Hitler's face had turned a yellowish hue, his cheeks hollowed, skin stretched tight over bone. Witnesses recalled the difference from only days before, his decline so rapid that even those who saw him daily were startled. His hands shook with such violence that he often clasped one behind his back, a trick to hide the tremor from staff and visitors. When forced to write or sign, he gripped the pen in a rigid fist, the letters uneven and jagged. Behind closed doors, Dr. Theodor Morell kept up a relentless regimen. Morell's notes and later Allied interrogations reveal the scope of Hitler's dependency. Every day, as many as 28 different substances entered his body. The list reads like a chemistry manual. Cocaine drops for the stabbing pain in his right eye. Eucadol, a powerful opioid, to dull persistent aches and quiet his nerves. Belladonna and antigas pills to ease the violent cramps that plagued his gut. Methamphetamine-laced vitamin injections, Vitamultin or Pervitin, intended to spark energy, but often leaving him restless and paranoid. Bromnervicid to calm him, barbiturates to force sleep, caffeine tablets to bring him back from stupor, glucose and iodine injections, hormonal shots, corticosteroids, and Mutaflor capsules for his bowels. When supplies ran low, Morel substituted where he could, but the shortages only made things worse. Withdrawal brought sweats, agitation, and even more confusion. Medical historians examining these records point to the likely effects: wild mood swings, bursts of rage, then hours of lethargy. The constant chemical assault blurred his thinking and clouded his judgment. Reports from inside the bunker describe Hitler as forgetful, sometimes unable to follow a conversation, other times gripped by obsession over trivial details. He slept little, prowling the bunker at odd hours, fixated on routines that gave the illusion of control. Those closest to him noticed how he clung to habit, even as his body failed. Heinz Linge, his longtime valet, remembered Hitler staring into space for minutes at a time, unmoving. Staff learned to interpret his silences and to avoid his gaze when he seemed lost in thought. The dictator's world had shrunk to a handful of rooms and a schedule of pills, injections, and rituals meant to hold back the inevitable. By late April, the bunker was no longer headquarters, but a sick room. Hitler's physical decay was no secret to those around him. Each new symptom, each shake or stumble, chipped away at the authority he once wielded. The man who had demanded absolute obedience now depended on a pharmacy's worth of drugs just to face the day. In the final days, the boundaries between illness, addiction, and despair became impossible to untangle. April 27, 1945. Deep in the Führer bunker, the radio team tunes in to the evening's BBC broadcast. The news hits like a detonation. Heinrich Himmler, head of the SS, and once among Hitler's most trusted, has been caught negotiating surrender terms with the Western Allies. The bunker's air thickens. Joseph Goebbels, monitoring the report, relays the message to Hitler. Within minutes, rage erupts. Witnesses recall Hitler's fury eclipsing even his earlier breakdown. He shouts for Himmler's arrest, labeling him a traitor, and demands the SS sever all contact. The betrayal is personal and absolute. For Hitler, loyalty had been the bedrock of his inner circle. Now, that foundation is gone. Hermann Göring's name is spat next. Only days earlier, Hitler learned that Göring, supposedly safeguarding German treasures in Bavaria, had sent a telegram suggesting he should take command if Hitler was incapacitated. To Hitler, this is another knife in the back. Göring is stripped of all titles and declared an enemy of the Reich. The bunker's corridors fill with the sound of slammed doors, shouted orders, and frantic attempts to trace communication lines. Martin Bormann, Hitler's private secretary, moves swiftly to cut off suspected collaborators. The inner circle, once a closed fraternity, now resembles a den of hunted men, each watching the others for signs of treachery. That night, a new horror arrives. News filters in from Milan. Benito Mussolini and his mistress, Clara Petacci, have been executed by Italian partisans. Their bodies, dumped in the piazza at Palazzo Loreto, are battered, spat upon, then strung up by their heels from meat hooks. The images reach the bunker through whispered reports and smuggled photographs. Hitler is transfixed, haunted by the thought of a similar fate. The spectacle in Milan becomes an obsession. He calls for his valet, Heinz Linge, and gives a chilling instruction. "You must never allow my corpse to fall into the hands of the Russians. They would make a spectacle in Moscow out of my body." From that moment, Every detail of Hitler's end is planned with one goal: denying the enemy any trophy. He repeats his order to have his body burned after death, no matter what. This is not a request, but a command, delivered with the same force as any battlefield directive. The bunker's staff, already reeling from the betrayals, now face a new burden: ensuring that nothing, not even Hitler's remains, will survive for the world to see. Outside, the city is collapsing. Inside, trust has evaporated. The bunker is no longer a command post, but a trap. Paranoia becomes policy. Every action, every instruction, is shaped by the fear of humiliation and revenge. Hitler's world has shrunk to a handful of rooms, a dwindling circle of loyalists, and the certainty that the end, when it comes, must leave nothing behind. Just after midnight on April 29th, the bunker's heavy doors closed on a strange, almost theatrical ritual. In a small, dim room, Adolf Hitler and Eva Braun stood before a registrar, Walter Wagner. As witnesses, Joseph Goebbels and Martin Bormann looked on. The Red Army was less than a kilometer away. Shells rattled the ceiling. Yet, here, the ceremony unfolded with stiff formality. Eva Braun, who had waited years in the shadows, finally became Eva Hitler. She signed the marriage register, first writing Eva B., then crossing out the initial and adding Hitler with careful pride. The marriage, legal but surreal, lasted less than 36 hours. There was no celebration, just a wedding breakfast of stale sandwiches, champagne, and forced laughter. Traudl Junge, the young secretary, later remembered the mood, an odd mix of relief, exhaustion, and dread. The newlyweds sat together, surrounded by the last loyalists. Goebbels toasted the couple, his words echoing in the cramped bunker, while outside, the city burned. The wedding was not a beginning, but a final act of defiance against the world closing in. As the night wore on, Hitler summoned Junge again. She had barely slept when she was called to take dictation. In a cramped office, Hitler began to recite his last will and political testament. His voice was hoarse but steady. He claimed, "The responsibility for the outbreak of this war cannot be laid upon me. It rests upon international statesmen either of Jewish origin or working in Jewish interests." He denounced Himmler and Göring as traitors, stripped them of all titles, and named new successors for a regime already in ruins. The testament repeated his demand that his body be burned after death, so that no enemy could use it for propaganda. 4 men signed the documents as witnesses: Goebbels, Bormann, General Wilhelm Burgdorf, and General Hans Krebs. Within 2 days, all 4 would be dead or missing. Goebbels by suicide in the garden above, Bormann lost during an escape attempt, Burgdorf and Krebs dead by their own hands in the bunker. Junge's task was to type the documents in triplicate, each copy destined for a different courier. The work was done in silence, broken only by the distant thud of artillery and the scratch of the typewriter. Junge would later recall the strange calm of that moment, the sense that she was recording not just the end of a regime, but the closing chapter of a nightmare. With the testament signed and the marriage complete, Hitler's world was sealed off. The bunker had become both tomb and stage, its rituals offering the illusion of order as the world above collapsed. For Eva Hitler, the role of wife came at the very end. Her new name entered into the register even as the final hours ticked away. For Hitler, the testament was a last attempt to shape the story of his downfall, to cast blame elsewhere, and demand that even his corpse would be denied to history. News of Dachau's liberation reached the bunker late on April 29th. The details were almost unbearable. American soldiers, sickened by the stench and horror inside the camp, had turned their guns on the German guards. Reports filtered down. Dozens, perhaps hundreds, shot in a storm of retribution. The numbers blurred. Some said 50, others 500. But the message was clear. The outside world was discovering the full scale of Nazi crimes, and there would be no mercy for those held responsible. Inside the bunker, the day began with ritual. At 11 o'clock, August Vollenhaupt, Hitler's barber, arrived for the last mustache trim. The routine had not changed, even as Soviet shells shook the walls. Vollenhaupt's hands trembled as he worked, clippers buzzing in the small washroom. Hitler, gaunt and silent, peered into the mirror, searching for some trace of the old image. The ritual offered a brief illusion of normalcy, one last gesture of control in a world collapsing by the hour. Heinz Linge, Hitler's valet, prepared the stopwatch for their morning game. "On your marks," he called, and Hitler rushed to dress, hands shaking as he buttoned his tunic. Linge handed over the wire-rimmed spectacles and the latest copy of the party newspaper. Around them, the bunker staff moved quickly, gathering piles of documents, orders, correspondence, and diaries. SS guards fed the papers into the furnace, flames licking higher as petrol was poured over the files. The corridors filled with the acrid smoke of burning secrets. In another room, Fritz Tornow, the dog handler, carried out a final order. Hitler's Alsatian, Blondie, was given a cyanide capsule. She died instantly. Eva Braun's spaniel and the remaining puppies followed. The deaths were swift, clinical, the last loose ends tied off before the end. Outside, artillery thundered. Inside, the bunker clung to routine, masking dread with habit as the world above them came apart. In the bunker's low-lit corridors, the last afternoon unfolded with a quiet that felt unnatural. One by one, Hitler's closest staff and supporters gathered for a final round of farewells. There were no speeches. Each handshake was silent, eyes meeting for only a moment, a wordless acknowledgement that nothing more could be said. Traudl Junge, the youngest secretary, received a gift from Eva Braun, a fur coat pressed into her arms with a simple parting line. "Take my fur coat as a memory. I always like well-dressed women." Eva's voice was calm. She told Junge she would rather die here than try to escape. The air in the bunker was heavy, as if time itself had slowed, the world outside reduced to muffled explosions and the distant rumble of artillery. Shortly after 2:30 in the afternoon, Hitler and Eva Braun retreated into his private study. Otto Günsche, his adjutant, stood guard at the door. Behind the thick walls, no one spoke. Minutes dragged by. Then, at 3:30 p.m., a sharp sound cut through the silence, a single gunshot. The staff waited, some frozen in place, others weeping quietly. When the door finally opened, Heinz Linge and Martin Bormann entered. Hitler was slumped on the sofa, a bullet wound in his temple. Eva lay beside him, lifeless, a faint scent of bitter almonds in the air from the cyanide. The bodies were wrapped in blankets and carried up the narrow stairs to the garden above. Soviet shells landed close by, shaking the ground. Goebbels and Bormann doused the corpses in petrol and set them alight, flames rising as the last salute was given. The smoke mixed with the spring air and the smell of burning fuel. In the chaos, the ritual was both precise and desperate, a final effort to erase what remained. British Lieutenant David Fraser, watching the battered city, later wrote, "There is still too much vile cruelty in the world for us to be able to say with true satisfaction, good is victorious." Even in death, the war's shadow lingered, refusing to lift. On April 30th, 1945, at exactly 3:30 p.m., Adolf Hitler was declared dead in the bunker beneath Berlin. Over the previous 24 hours, primary documents show he ordered the cremation of his body, dictated a final testament denying responsibility for the war, and watched his inner circle collapse through betrayal and fear. Eyewitness accounts confirm his physical decline and mental unraveling, from the 28 daily medications to the silent farewells. Yet some questions endure. The full details of the cremation remain contested, and Soviet records on the recovery of his remains are still incomplete. Today, historians agree these final hours marked the end of Nazi Germany. But debate continues on how the regime's last acts shaped post-war Europe. The evidence is clear. The collapse inside the bunker reflected the destruction Hitler brought to millions. As the documents attest, the consequences of these 24 hours still echo in the study of power, responsibility, and the dangers of unchecked ideology.